Chapter 71. The true martial holy sect contains a wondrous place named the Thunder-Attracting Pool. Legend has it that the pool was constructed during the era of the divine travel great emperor. When the emperor was young, he once faced a formidable opponent. He and the divine travel great emperor battled 6 times, each claiming 3 victories and 3 defeats. This rival was revered as the Thunderbolt Venerable. When the Thunderbolt Venerable was on the verge of breaking through from the peak of the Esteem Vein realm to the Emperor Pulse realm, he attracted thousands of thunderbolts to undergo tribulation. The area where he underwent his tribulation was enveloped by a vast thunder sea with 9 skies, cloud thunder, purgatory divine thunder, an imperial heaven capital thunder, an assembly of thunderbolts that would make the bravest of hearts tremble, all converging together. That day, thunderclaps echoed through the heart as an aura of purple dawn approached. The thunderbolts, like a long river piercing the sun, hung inverted across 100 miles of the sky. The Thunderbolt Venerable emerged from the thunder sea with tens of thousands of divine thunders aiding him as if by divine decree. He ultimately realized the Emperor Pulse and henceforth achieved supremacy. Later, after the divine travel great emperor took on his destiny, he personally reorganized that thunder sea. The origin of the Thunder-Attracting Pool stems from this event. One reason was to pay tribute to his old friend, and the other was to leave future generations with a place to refine their bodies. After Suzume arrived at the Thunder-Attracting Pool, there were already many disciples cultivating there. Boundless thunder filled the land, and as one looked into the distance, it seemed as if they were standing in a world of purple and pale blue. At the outermost edge of the Thunder-Attracting Pool were strands of small electrical arcs. As one moved deeper inward, the thunder grew in size and its power gradually intensified. It is said that at the very heart of the Thunder-Attracting Pool resides the 9 heavens divine thunder, the divine thunder used by the Thunderbolt Venerable himself. Thunderbolt body refinement is one of the most direct methods to strengthen the physique, but the thunder of the Thunder-Attracting Pool is only effective for those at the Esteem Vein realm and below. Once someone breaks through to the Emperor Pulse realm, it becomes useless. Suzume stepped into the Thunder Sea. His body, having merged with the prison-suppressing divine body, was very strong. The pale blue electrical arcs that hit his body felt no different than a tickle. Moving further in, the thunder's color deepened, and there was a faint numbing sensation on his skin. Looking up, one could see pale blue thunderbolts transforming into a long dragon, weaving and roaring through the Thunder Sea. Suzume took a deep breath. The Thunder-Attracting Pool was divided into 5 distinct areas. The first area contained mild electrical arcs, while the second area teemed with ordinary thunder and lightning. The third area contained a type of thunder known as Earthcore Townflame thunder. As Suzume stepped into the third area, he could distinctly feel a tearing sensation on his body. This thunder struck him, and his Boda cells alternated between being destroyed and enhanced. There weren't many disciples in the third area aside from a few individuals. The sea of deep blue was all that met Suzume's eyes. He had not walked far when he encountered a familiar face, Gao Xiang, the youth from the 100,000 Mountains, endowed with the bloodline of the ancient power bear. Currently, Gao Xiang stood in the most concentrated area of thunder in the third region. His muscles were bulging, hair standing on end. Drenched in the thunder sea, he looked up into the sky, allowing the thunder to crackle and boom upon him. His expression was not one of enduring the pain of being torn by thunder, but rather one of enjoyment. To him, the thunder sea was like a soothing spring breeze, seemingly posing no threat. Indeed, the bloodline of the ancient power bear was strong. As he grew, he could even contend with some of the last of the 100 great battle bodies. At that moment, Gao Xiang also saw Suzume and expressed his surprise. "It's you." After the trials for new disciples, he had specifically inquired about Suzume's identity, the son of Deputy Sect Master Su Qinshan. He preferred not to offend him, yet he also did not wish to become a fawning sycophant. "Should we take a trip to the 4th zone for fun?" Suzume asked with a smile. Gao Xiang looked at Suzume in surprise and quickly shook his head. He had thought about venturing into the 4th zone when he was in the 3rd zone without feeling any pressure, but once he entered, he realized that the thunderbolts in there were completely different from those in the 3rd zone. It wasn't a change in quantity, but a qualitative transformation. Under Gao Xiang's intense gaze, Suzume took steps towards the 4th zone. Purple thunderbolts roared majestically, howling and shrieking hysterically as if they intended to destroy the entire firmament. Imperial Heaven Capital Thunder, that was the divine thunder of the fourth zone. Thunderbolts turned from deep blue to purple. And as Suzume stepped in, he felt his body sink, his muscles experienced a strong sense of tearing, as if he would be annihilated in this madness. Suzume could feel this intense tearing and pain. He sat cross-legged, slowly circulating the cultivation technique within his body to heal himself. Although the thunderbolts were painful, they were not lethal, but Suzume also knew that he could only stay here now. However, Suzume was aware of his purpose for coming here. He was here to temper Tyrant Shadow, not to forge his body. Only when the pain on his body had nearly numbed and his body had gradually adapted to this assault did Suzume stand up and move toward the fifth zone. Has this guy gone mad? Gao Xiang, watching from behind, murmured to himself as his complexion slightly changed. Suzume reached the border between the fourth and fifth zones. Instead of entering rashly, he enveloped Tyrant Shadow with the spiritual energy from the six domains. Then, using the spiritual energy to drag Tyrant Shadow, he levitated it into the fifth zone while he sat on the edge of the fourth zone. The thunderbolts in the fifth zone seemed endless, with deep purple lightning covering the entire area. He could even hear the roaring of some thunder dragons. The thunderbolts here had developed sentience. Nine skies cloud thunder, purgatory divine thunder, purple gold heaven thunder, numerous legendary thunderbolts merged into one. When the long silent thunder sea was disturbed once again, the arrival of Tyrant Shadow was like a pebble on the surface of a lake. First, it caused ripples, then came the roaring waves, followed by a towering tsunami bellowing furiously. Countless thunderbolts seemed to find an outlet, all striking towards Tyrant Shadow. The crackling explosions echoed within the thunderbolts, sparks flying and divine might shining. Amidst the thunderbolts slicing through, the blade of Tyrant Shadow began to tremble in midair. Suzume's gaze became more focused. The spiritual energy within him from the six domains intensified, all channeled into Tyrant Shadow. As time inched forward, the trembling of Tyrant Shadow gradually stabilized, the blade seeming brighter and even taking on some of the deep purple hue from the thunderbolts. Suzume took a deep breath and allowed Tyrant Shadow to continue tempering in the fifth zone while he resumed his own cultivation within the fourth zone. Thunderbolts churned wildly within the Thunder Sea until, by noon the next day, Suzume awoke from his cultivation. Today was the day of the competition with Yen Buhue, and he planned to take Xiaogizi to enjoy the festivities. Looking at Tyrant Shadow still tempering above, Suzume reached out and called to it. Tyrant Shadow transformed into a beam of extreme light and flew over from above. Chapter 72. He glanced at Tyrant Shadow. Although this refinement hadn't fully stimulated the Thunderbolt attribute, the weapon's quality had significantly improved. Suzume felt that after a few more refinements, once Tyrant Shadow activated its Thunderbolt property, the weapon could also advance to the mysterious tier. This was also why he used high-tier materials to forge weapons. Although Tyrant Shadow was only an ordinary weapon before, its potential was infinite. If it had been made from ordinary materials, it probably wouldn't have lasted more than a few seconds in the Thunderbolt before shattering. After sheathing Tyrant Shadow in the scabbard behind him, Suzume made his way step by step toward the Outer Sect. The location for the Outer Sect Disciples Tiger Rankings Contest had a dedicated combat stage. By now, the area around the combat stage was already surrounded by a dense crowd of Outer Sect disciples. As a newcomer who had just entered the Outer Sect this year, Yen Buhue directly climbed to the 11th rank on the Tiger Rankings, becoming the most dazzling among the new disciples in no time, and now he was about to challenge Su Run, who was ranked 7th. Every challenge within the top 10 of the Tiger Rankings caused a stir in the Outer Sect. People enjoyed witnessing the rise of a newcomer, watching them ascend like a newly shining star. They also took pleasure in the fall of a genius, relishing the misfortune while finding some sense of their presence. The combat stage was crafted from blocks of Qinggang stones, known for their strong defensive power, impenetrable without the force of someone in the True Vein realm. On the combat stage at that moment, Su Run, dressed in white, leaned casually against the iron chains on the edge of the stage, a longsword hanging at his waist. His aura was overwhelming, with his eyes slightly squinted as he calmly awaited Yen Bui's arrival. As the fierce heat of the day began to fade with the arrival of autumn, The scorching sun started to dissipate bit by bit. The autumn breeze picked up the gradually withering yellow leaves on the branches, gently floating in the air. "Here he comes," someone shouted, and all eyes turned in the direction straight ahead. In the distance, the mountain ranges were shrouded in mist, and the living quarters of the outer sect disciples were scattered in an orderly fashion. The shaded path leading to the combat stage was paved with white pebbles. The willows on both sides swayed gently in the breeze. The youth, clad in a white robe, carrying a longsword, had his long hair fluttering behind him with the wind. He walked toward the combat stage with purposeful strides. "I thought you might chicken out," said Su-Run. Opening his eyes, his gaze was sharp as a flash of swordlight, and he said with a faint chuckle, "Quick with the tongue, just make sure you don't concede later," remarked Yen Buhue coolly, sword she twined around him, head held high and chest thrust out. With sharp brows and piercing eyes, he resembled an unsheathed sword. Su-Ren snorted coldly, and then a clang resounded, the longsword unsheathed, tracing a white mark in the air and lashing out directly at Yen Buhue. Yen Buhue wasn't flustered. Slowly drawing his own razor-sharp sword, the two swords collided, sending sparks flying in all directions. When the longswords intersected in the shape of a cross, Su-Ren's spiritual energy burst out, forcing Yen Buhue to retreat step by step. Mysterious tear vein skill, cross/. Su-Ren hummed softly. His longsword was wrapped in spiritual energy, and each strike seemed to contain an astonishing force. Yen Buhue hurriedly parried, only to feel his hands go numb from the shocks. Nearly reaching the edge of the combat stage, he quickly rolled on the ground, narrowly dodging Su-Ren's attack. Mysterious tear vein skill, burst kill. Yen Buhue also roared, moving to Su-Ren's back, his longsword slashing down with an indescribable force. Their fight could be described as lethal at every turn, with neither holding back in the slightest. Su-Ren did not turn around. His body shifted slightly to one side, then he dodged the incoming sword. His right arm trembled at a specific frequency. Before it crashed into Yen Bui's chest, Yen Buhue had no time to evade and was sent flying backward, slamming heavily into the iron chain railing beside him. "Looks like we haven't missed the good show." Su Zime and Xiao Gizi arrived. Watching the already gathered crowd around the combat stage, they found an open space to watch from afar. Yen Buhue stabilized himself and gave Su-Ren a hard look. "Indeed, none of the disciples who can make it into the top 10 of the Tiger ranking are simple characters. The opponent is in no way inferior to myself in terms of combat experience or the application of vein skills," he thought. "That's all you've got," Su-Ren said with a light chuckle, slowly raising the longsword in his hand, arrogantly declaring, "With the sword, I'll end you." His longsword was enveloped in a dark spiritual energy, causing the spiritual energy around the blade to tremble. "Stone tremor wave sword," Su-Ren murmured softly. He took a step back with his right foot, slightly bent at the waist, his right elbow shifting a little. Then, as he lightly stepped his left foot on the ground, his entire being shot forward like an arrow released from a bowstring. As the tremors around the longsword grew more intense, the air around its blade began to warp. A sword strike came down, and a particularly dazzling sword light condensed in the air, seemingly about to split Yen Buhue in half from head to toe. Yen Bui's eyes were grave. He didn't dodge. If he couldn't handle the sword, he probably wouldn't have another chance to fight back. As the splendid sword light magnified before his eyes, Yen Buhue seized the right moment to shift his body to the side. This move didn't entirely avoid the attack. The entire longsword plunged into Yen Bui's abdomen. When the longsword penetrated his body, everything appeared to freeze. Even Su-Ren was briefly stunned. He knew his sword strike was fierce, but if Yen Buhue had truly wanted to avoid it at all costs, it wouldn't have been impossible. But the opponent had hesitated. Su-Ren tried to withdraw his longsword, only to see Yen Buhue gripping the blade tightly with his right hand, refusing to let it be pulled from his body. Then Yen Buhue raised his left hand's longsword and struck directly at Su-Ren. "This guy did it on purpose," Su-Ren exclaimed in shock. He quickly released his longsword and attempted to dodge, but his right arm was still cut by the blade. Su-Ren moved aside, looking at his right arm that was now soaked with blood, then turned to look at the young man in front of him. He intentionally didn't dodge. He completely traded his life for a wound. Although the arm with which he wielded his sword was injured, the opponent's injury was much more severe, and he was now in a life-threatening state. "I know I'm no match for you," Yen Buhue said with a smile, his complexion somewhat pale, his smile frighteningly eerie. But I just wanted to prove something, to make people like you understand that no one can insult my mother. Even if you are a lion, this ant will tear off a piece of your flesh." Yen Buhui unhesitatingly pulled out the long sword from his abdomen, blood spurting out, but he seemed unconcerned. At this moment, he was like a divine demon on a campaign in the sea of blood, fearless and undaunted. This was his philosophy of life, as well as his sword Tao. Chapter 73. Yen Buhui, because of excessive blood loss, grew increasingly pale. He half-knelt on the ground, clearly devoid of any fighting strength. "Just admit defeat." Su Ren approached and kicked Yen Buhui over with a foot. Yen Bui's body slammed heavily into the iron chains beside him, and the two longswords in his hands dropped to the ground. Su Ren walked up and stepped on Yen Bui's longsword, then bent down to pick up his own. In the outer sect competition, it was forbidden to harm an opponent's life. Although the matches were unpredictable and mishaps occasionally occurred, given the current situation where Yen Buhui had lost the power to resist, it was naturally out of the question for Su Ren to deliver a killing blow. Besides, the outer sect elders were supervising nearby, watching his longsword under Su Ren's foot. Yen Bui's eyes reddened with fury, and from some unknown reserve of strength, he charged at Su Ren. Su Ren was quite startled by his posture and subconsciously stepped back twice, only to see Yen Buhui pick up his own longsword and gently wipe the footprint off the blade. "What is this guy doing?" the disciples whispered among themselves, seemingly not understanding his action. To Yen Buhui, there were two things in life he could not betray. One was his mother, whom he would not allow anyone to slander. She had died of an illness when he was Yunna, disease that was not severe and could have been cured by the Huang family with a simple pill, but those people chose to do nothing, and he, at the young age of 7, had to watch his mother depart from this world. Back then, he vowed to stand above all others and destroy the entire Huang family to seek justice for his mother. The other thing was his sword. After his mother passed away, this sword became his sole support. He had no friends and needed no such worthless kinship. The only companion he had was the sword. This sword was not just like a brother or a good friend. Every time he grasped the hilt, he was filled with boundless hope and confidence. That was a power that belonged to him alone, and now, this very sword was being stepped on by someone else. Blood was still flowing from his body, even drenching the entire sword. The blood-red appearance was startling. Yen Buhui could distinctly feel his head spinning, and his vision started to blur gradually. Yen Buhui slowly lay on the combat stage, his ears ringing with noise as the sounds around him began to grow chaotic. "That's all he is, trash, a waste." He seemed to faintly hear the disdainful murmurs of the crowd, the wails of the longsword. Yen Buhui could sense the emotions of his own blade. From a very young age, he could feel the emotions of his sword. Only when he grew up did he realize he had unwittingly awakened the weapon's spirit. His vision became fuzzier, and his eyelids heavier by the moment. Yen Buhui calmly watched his wailing longsword, feeling the ebb of his own life force. Suddenly, he remembered so much. Starting from the day he received the sword, he cherished it immensely, especially after his mother's departure. He slept with the sword every night, hardly ever leaving it behind. They had spent countless months together, endured numerous days and nights. They had gazed at the moon, laughed, and groaned together, and he had poured all his heartaches to the sword. "Damn it, he's not just a cold weapon, he's my good brother. How could I let him be trampled underfoot?" Yen Bui's lips curved into a relieved smile as he remembered the long nights of yesteryear, with only his sword for company. Suddenly, it was as if a divine light shot straight from his spine to his brain, leaving him completely stunned. What exactly is a sword? Thunder exploded within his heart, and Yen Bui's mind went blank, clearer than it had ever been in his life. The scene before him seemed to dissolve into a vast expanse of gray mist, and the thunderous noise in his ears was incessant, while countless lines of sword light wove through his mind. "I myself travel the wind and tread the 9 skies, with the 3-foot-long Guan sword in hand." In the outside world, the longsword began to tremble slightly, with strands of sword chi permeating the air around him. As the sword chi swirled and thunder rumbled, dispersing the fog, Yen Buhui also slowly stood up. All things possess momentum. Be it the flowers, the trees, the heroes, or the formidable, everything in the world has its own presence. So does the sword have its own sword momentum. When such momentum gathers, the scene before his eyes became unprecedentedly clear, and Yen Buhui felt as if he was seeing something different. "Intent, that is sword intent. Is it over just like that?" whispered the disciples below. "The newcomer doesn't understand the immensity of heaven and earth. He needs to have his sharpness blunted." to realize that this outer sect is no place for his arrogance. Daring to challenge elder brother Su Ren, I thought he must be capable of something. It's so mediocre, I knew this would be the outcome. Su Ren, seeing Yen Bui's corpse-like appearance, shook his head to himself, preparing to kick him off the combat stage and end the contest. The gap in their realms was not so easily bridged. Su Ren had also been among the talented disciples in his youth, making a sharp entrance into the holy sect, but this world never lacks for talented disciples. The truly strong must possess a reverent heart, and those who make it to the end are the real winners. At this moment, a streak of sword chi sliced towards Su Ren. Su Ren was startled. He shifted sideways, barely avoiding the sword chi strike. His gaze moved to the front. He saw countless terrifying strands of sword chi swirling around Yen Buhui, and the young man who had appeared all but spent was now holding the long sword, struggling to get to his feet. Yen Buhui felt a surge of the bold ambition to rid the world of demons rise within him. His pupils contracted and a chill went up his spine, dazzling thoughts exploding in his mind like fireworks. The sword momentum dispersed, and with the seed of intent planted within his heart, the aura around him grew ever stronger, almost predicting the arrival of great changes approaching like the wind before the storm. The longsword in his hand sang joyfully, layers upon layers of sword intent enshrouding the whole combat stage like an overwhelming tide. He slightly opened his eyes, with limitless sword chi cleansing and bursting forth. What is this? Su Ren's complexion shifted. He instinctively stepped back, watching the endless sword chi swirling in the sky. Yen Buhui wielded his longsword slowly, and countless strands of sword chi, as if finding an outlet, all flew toward Su Ren. Su Ren, looking at the scene that filled the combat stage like a sword prison, knew he couldn't avoid it and hastily raised his sword to meet the attack. With a clang, sparks flew off the longsword, and Su Ren felt his hands go numb from the shock. His face filled with horror, sweat streaming down his forehead. Despite the several minor realms of difference between them, he could barely defend against just this one instance of sword chi. Chapter 74. Watching the endless sword chi slash across and sword intent rip through the silent sky with an irresistible force, exploding in all directions, Su Ren's heart seemed to stop beating, almost engulfed in suffocation that came from the depths of death. I surrender. When the sky was filled with swarming sword chi and that magnificent spectacle unfolded as if eclipsing the sun, Su Ren almost burst a vein and roared those words. After yelling out his surrender, Su Ren seemed to have used up all of his strength, collapsing weakly onto the ground, and those sword chi stopped just 2 centimeters away from his nose tip. But because the sword chi was too immense, a few strands still slashed onto Su Ren. He screamed in shock, his body blown away by the sword chi, and his originally white clothes were instantly stained with blood in midair. The crowd's gaze followed Su Ren as he tumbled through the air, hitting the ground hard and kicking up clouds of dust. He lay motionless, his life hanging by a thread. Yen Buhui on the combat stage also cracked a smile, then his body could no longer hold up and he collapsed. Noise started erupting around the combat stage, people with stunned expressions muttering to themselves, that newcomer won. It seemed no one could believe it. What looked like a sure defeat suddenly turned into a counterkill. Yen Buhui lay unconscious on the combat stage, but at this moment, not a single disciple dared to approach him. Of course, there were also many who wanted to help Yen Buhui, conveniently offering a favor. Based on the potential Yen Buhui had shown, his future achievements would definitely not be low. But Xiao Xingyu had already warned that anyone who dared to come into contact with Yen Buhui would be considered his enemy. Therefore, the outer sect disciples could only sigh a few times before silently leaving. Su Zime, accompanied by Xiao Gizi, went up to check on Yen Bui's condition. Although his injuries were severe, he would not die immediately. But if prompt treatment was not provided, he could be in danger. Gentlemen, some things are better left alone. From the other side of the combat stage, Huang Tianxie in white robes slowly approached. Beat it, Xiao Gizi said, frowning without even sparing a glance. After all, with Su Zime backing him, he didn't need to be afraid. Gentlemen, I am a friend of Xiao Xingyu, grandson of the great elder from your true martial holy sect. Huang Tianxi's gaze sharpened as he spoke to Xiao Gizi. You will pay for what you just said. Xiao Xingyu counts for nothing. Su Zime raised his head slightly, dismissively saying, this is the true martial holy sect, not your little piece of land in Northwest City. You'd best mind your behavior, or else I wouldn't mind making you end up like him. Su Zime pointed to Su Ren laying beside them. unconscious, and spoke indifferently. Yu Huang Tianxi's expression changed as he stared at Su Zime. He wasn't without sense either, since Xiao Xingyi's name didn't intimidate the other party. It was likely that the other's backing was not weak either. May I know how to address you two gentlemen? You're not worthy of knowing, Su Zime replied calmly, then signaled to an outer sect elder nearby and left with Xiao Gizi. The outer sect elder caught the hint and hurriedly took Yen Buhui, who was seriously injured, away for treatment. Huang Tianxia watched Su Zime's retreating figure, his expression changing unpredictably, and ultimately let out a heavy snort of contempt. By noon the next day, Xiao Xingyu had arrived at Goose Southern Peak to personally seek out Su Zime about. Xiao Xingyu, he was 2 years older than Su Zime and had started his cultivation 2 years earlier. It was said that when he was born, he was tested and found to have king-level aptitude, which his grandfather, the Great Elder, expended a great deal of energy to elevate to emperor level. Among the younger generation of the true martial holy sect, he was also considered a standout. Perhaps it was because of the conflict between the Great Elder and Su Qingshan that Su Zime and Xiao Xingyu often fought and brawled from a young age. In the courtyard of Goose Southern Peak, Su Zime lay on a lounge chair, basking in the sunlight without a care in the world. Xiao Xingyu stood by, clad in a purple robe, and stared intently as he said, "The Yen Buhui incident has nothing to do with you. How I do things does not require your instruction," Su Zime replied calmly. "Even if you get involved, it will be to no avail. I think I still have the capability to expel an outer sect disciple from the sect," replied Xiao Xingyu, not giving an inch. "Don't forget, the helmsman of the sect still bears the name Su," Su Zime said with a smile, "helping others target disciples of one's own sect. You really are impressive. While the matter may not seem substantial, it is definitely not minor either, and who knows what would happen if I were to file a complaint. Do you think I would expose myself personally?" Xiao Xingyu coolly responded, "Then you better be careful." Su Zime pointed at his own eyes and chuckled, "Because I'm watching. Do you really want to get involved for an outer sect disciple you don't even know?" After a moment of silence, Xiao Xingyu asked again, "Beat it, don't think you're all that," Su Zime said disdainfully. "You're like a jumpy grasshopper that I could easily squash if I wanted to." Xiao Xingyi's face alternated between shades of anger and amusement, as if he was laughing out of spite. "Fine, we shall see," he said, watching Xiao Xingyu leave in a fury. Su Zime shook his head to himself. There were indeed some people he did not take seriously, not out of arrogance, but merely because they lived in different worlds. Having lived a life once over, he had seen a far more vast universe and too many different scenes. Later, Su Zime called over Xiao Gizi and instructed, "Go to Jokai City and bring Shirley Changong here, lie in wait and ambush Huang Tianxia on his way back to Northwest City." "Brother, do you want to kill him?" Xiao Gizi asked in astonishment. "No, the Huang family of Northwest City may not be a match for our true martial holy sect, but they are not weak. As the second son of the Huang family, how could he possibly travel without protection?" Su Zime said with a smile, "Killing him with just an esteem vein realm cultivator isn't enough. I just want to give him a warning that this world can be very dangerous indeed." Xiao Gizi nodded. Sometimes he really didn't understand Su Zime's thoughts, but still, he left the true martial holy sect that day. In the following days, Su Zime's life returned to normal, refining Tyrant Shadow by day at the Thunder Sea and absorbing the essence of the moon at night. Occasionally, he would also visualize and strategize his cultivation technique. The days of departing for the Holy Spring sect drew closer, and on that day, Su Zime was resting in the courtyard. Chun Xiao, the maidservant, suddenly came to report that someone from Miaolio Peak was looking for him. Miaolio Peak was where the sixth elder resided, and Su Zime instantly thought of Bailey Xiao. When the visitor from Miaolio Peak entered, Su Zime saw it was indeed the sisters Xue Qianxue and Xue Mengmeng. Chapter 75. "What do you two want with me?" Su Zime asked with a smile at the corner of his mouth. "We're here to convey a message from Senior Sister Bailey," Xue Qianxue said gently. "Senior Sister Bailey has always wanted to visit you and is wondering when you might be available. If it were just the two of you, I might consider it, but her not interested," Su Zime said with a chuckle as he shook his head. "Can't you speak more nicely?" Xue Qianxue said helplessly. "We're just here to pass on a message. Senior Sister Bailey has always admired you." "Admire me? Ill believe that when pigs fly," Su Zime thought to himself, amused, but still, he squinted slightly and gave the sisters a look, saying, Then tell her to come find me at Goose Southern Peak tomorrow afternoon. Feeling the unreserved gaze from Suzume, Shui Mengmeng wrinkled her nose and glared at him, saying fiercely, "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a beautiful woman before?" "Beautiful women I have in spades, but it seems I have yet to try a pair of sisters," Suzume said with a laugh. "Big sister, let's go, we won't speak with this kind of scoundrel," Shui Mengmeng said, her face flushing red as she tugged on Shui Qiangshu's sleeve. "Then remember what you've promised tomorrow afternoon." Shui Qiangshu took a deep look at Suzume and prepared to leave with her sister. "I watched the heaven phenomenon. Tonight the stars are brilliant. The moon is like a disc. Why don't you two stay? We can enjoy the moonlight, drink some wine, talk about life, and get to know each other better? Wouldn't that be wonderful?" As Suzaime's laughter echoed behind them, the footsteps of the Shui sisters quickened as they left, watching the two leave. The smile on Suzaime's face slowly returned to calmness, and he clicked his tongue. "Bailey Xiao, I do wonder what game you're playing." Suzume had always been pondering whether his pursuit of Bailey Xiao in his previous life was truly because he liked her. In fact, it was not. He just wanted to sleep with her. Any talk of love at first sight is just about physical attraction. Real love is something that builds over time. Since the afternoon, Suzume had been staying at the thunder-attracting pool because his Tyrant Shadow Heavenly Thunder attribute refinement was about to be completed. To be precise, the first stage of Heavenly Thunder attribute refinement was completed, and to refine the second stage, all other 5 attributes had to be finished as well. In the 5th zone of the thunder-attracting pool, immense lightning formed a web of electricity. Silver dragons roared and purple thunder raged. The first time anyone entered the thunder-attracting pool, they would be stunned by the sight, but for someone like Suzume who had been there often, it was no big deal. The Tyrant Shadow blade trembled. A blade. Light burst forth, and in addition to the mark of the shadow dragon on the blade, there appeared another mark of thunder near the hilt. When Suzume stepped out of the thunder-attracting pool, he realized he had been inside for a day and a night, and it was just afternoon outside, the time he had agreed to meet with Bailey Xiao. "This must also be considered as the first real formal meeting between the two of us in this life," Suzume said to himself with a chuckle, walking towards Goose Southern Peak. The sunset is endlessly magnificent, but it signals the approach of dusk. In front of the courtyard at Goose Southern Peak, the woman stood with her back to the path up the mountain on the edge of mid-slope, her gaze fixed on the distant sunset. The halo of the setting sun hung at the edge of the sky, and today's afterglow seemed to be much more splendid than usual. Blue sky, white clouds, and the lingering green mountains. The woman's long hair cascaded down her back, underneath which she wore a thin, white shirt and a light blue washing silk veil draped over it. As the veil fluttered in the wind together with her hair, a faint, enchanting fragrance emanated from her. Her skin was as pale as snow, and her eyes brimmed with tenderness and intelligence. Most eye-catching of all were her long, white, straight legs. When the light blue washing silk veil fluttered slightly, those exposed legs probably caused the hormones of many to explode. Unfortunately, there were hardly any people passing by the courtyard in front of Goose Southern Peak as Suzume made her way to Goose Southern Peak. The first thing she saw was Bailey Xiao. The latter also sensed her arrival and slowly turned around, with eyes like gentle waters and lips red and teeth white. From the perspective of an onlooker, Bailey Xiao indeed possessed extraordinary beauty. She was like a fairy fallen from grace, as if even a glance at her was a kind of blasphemy. "What does senior sister Bailey want with me?" Suzume asked with a light laugh as she approached. "Su's senior brother might have heard that before. Your sister lived in a small mountain village. Since I'm still new to the sect gate and unfamiliar with many things, I wanted to pay a visit to senior brother and hope for his care in the future," Bailey Xiao said with a smile as refreshing as a spring breeze, slowly continuing. "In fact, your sister should have visited earlier, but senior brother was not at the sect gate, so I specially sent someone to inquire, and I hope senior brother doesn't mind." Suzume's gaze sharpened, deeply observing Bailey Xiao. Many people, after an overnight success, would want to conceal their humble and mundane past, but Bailey Xiao mentioned it quite calmly. "No problem," Suzume said as she walked into the courtyard. "Did you come to see me just for this?" Previously, my aunt and the deputy sect master arranged a marriage between us. Although I don't like this kind of arranged marriage, I do not really oppose it. Bailey Xiao followed into the yard, looking at Su Zime with a stubborn expression and asked, "Can I know why you rejected it?" Su Zime looked at Bailey Xiao, who was also staring back at him resolutely. There was a sense of dissatisfaction and defiance that is typical of a young girl's temperament. Quite the acting skills, Su Zime chuckled. If not for the experiences of his past life, he might have treated the girl as an ordinary young woman. What is senior brother laughing at? Bailey Xiao pressed her lips together, speaking with a hint of grievance. Is Xiao really that unbearable? Watching the girl's self-imposed act, Su Zime suddenly found it somewhat amusing, as if to say, all the world is drunk and I alone am sober. He shook his head and said with a laugh, I just don't want to take someone else's love, that's all. Bailey Xiao was stunned, then quickly responded, your sister doesn't have anyone she loves. Is that so? Su Zime said with a smile lingering on his lips, then called over the guard Zhang Chongtian. He said slowly, help me kill someone. Zhang Chongtian was taken aback but still responded respectfully, please give your orders, young master. Go to Qingyang village and kill a young man named Chu Yang. Upon hearing Su Zime's words, Bailey Xiao's face immediately changed, and she quickly responded, senior brother Su, Chu Yang and I are just friends, nothing more. Why kill an innocent man? Why so nervous? Su Zime smiled, raising his right hand intending to touch Bailey Xiao's chin, but Bailey Xiao turned her head away, speaking with displeasure, senior brother Su, please conduct yourself with dignity. Chapter 76. If you don't want me to kill Chu Yang and slaughter everyone in Qingyang village, you'd better stay still, Su Zime said indifferently. Bailey Xiao's face turned awkward. She gave Su Zime a deep look but dared not make any rash moves. Truly affectionate, aren't you? Su Zime extended his right hand, slowly lifted Bailey Xiao's chin, and clicked his tongue as he said, what a fine skin. What do you want to do? Bailey Xiao's gaze sharpened as she bit her lip and spoke. Su Zime sneered and then suddenly grabbed Bailey Xiao's throat. He squeezed hard, until Bailey Xiao's face turned pale and she even struggled to breathe. He clenched her neck and pulled Bailey Xiao's head closer to his own, gazing at her pitiable face as he said in a low tone. Everyone has the right to choose their own path in life, and I don't judge others' choices lightly, but once you make your choice, you have to pay the price for it, even if it costs you your life. After he finished speaking, Su Zime flung Bailey Xiao away. Bailey Xiao's body crashed heavily against the rockery in the courtyard. She got up awkwardly, her complexion pale, gasping for air with sweat trickling down her forehead. I don't know where I might have offended elder brother Su. If it was an unintentional act, I hope elder brother Su will forgive me, said Bailey Xiao, not with anger but with sincere eyes as she looked at Su Zime. An adult should always control their emotions appropriately. Those who aspire to greatness do not sweat the small stuff. Su Zime looked at Bailey Xiao and said, get lost while I'm still in a good mood, however. Our affair isn't over yet. Have you ever experienced the feeling when your beloved is being tortured right before your eyes, and you're completely powerless to stop it? Truly exhilarating. As he spoke, Su Zime laughed loudly, his face slightly twisted with a hint of madness in his smile. If elder brother Su has any demands, this is a matter between us and I hope you will refrain from killing the innocent. Bailey Xiao replied calmly, then said, your sister here is feeling unwell today and will head back first. I'll come to find elder brother another time when the opportunity arises. Watching Bailey Xiao's retreating figure, Su Zime leaned back alone on a lounge chair in the courtyard, turning his head to gaze at the sunset, his eyes profound. 2 days later, Xiao Gizi also returned from Zhoukei City, since Shirley Chongkong found it inconvenient to come to the true martial holy sect. Xiao Gizi arranged for him to stay in a small town under the holy sect. Meanwhile, in the living quarters of the outer sect disciples, Yen Buhui regained consciousness from his coma. This time he had been unconscious for 3 days and nights, and the moment he became clear-headed, his first thought was of his sword. Seeing the long sword quietly resting on the table brought him relief. His body was wrapped in bandages, and although he felt extremely weak in reality, the real injury was only the stab wound to his abdomen. Just then, the door opened, and an old man came in carrying a bowl of porridge. If you can move, eat this, the old man said flatly. Yen Buhui recognized the man. He was one of the true martial holy sect's outer sect elders, the same one who had been the referee during his spar with Su Ren. "Thank you, Elder Pang." Yen Buhui knew the elder had saved him and quickly expressed his thanks. Then he picked up the porridge and began to drink. "Although you defeated Su Ren, the matter won't end there," the elder said, looking at Yen Buhui. "I know. I'll face the soldiers with my own shield and the water with my own earth," Yen Buhui replied. With a smile, "I'll point you to a clear path. Go to Goose Southern Peak. You'll find someone there who can help you," the elder said before leaving. Yen Buhui watched the door slowly close, fell silent for a moment, then picked up his thin porridge and started drinking again. "Brother, the matter with Yu Bo has been resolved." A few days later, Xiao Gizi came to Goose Southern Peak and said to Su Zime with a smile, "What was the outcome?" Su Zime asked curiously. "I did as you said before and inquired about Yu Bo in the outer sect. He was arrogant because of his high aptitude, looking down on many outer sect disciples, especially since he seduced the Tao companion of one of the disciples." Xiao Gizi chuckled and said, "I found that disciple and gave him the condensing vein pill. He agreed to my request and challenged Yu Bo as soon as he broke through to the condensing vein realm." "And then?" Su Zime asked. "I just came back from the combat stage. That disciple must have been driven by anger. Yu Bo had already surrendered, but he didn't stop hitting him." Xiao Gizi laughed. "Now he's been suppressed by the outer sect elders. But Yu Bo has also been beaten to a pulp. I estimate he won't recover for 10 days to half a month." Su Zime nodded and said, "When you strike a snake, you must hit the vital parts. You need to be ruthless, or else he won't remember the lesson." "What do you mean, brother?" Xiao Gizi asked in surprise. "Find someone to ruin his aptitude," Su Zime said calmly. Xiao Gizi hesitated for a bit before slowly saying, "After all, his master is an inner sect elder. If this kind of thing is discovered, it would be quite scandalous. You must understand something. It's precisely because he has king-level aptitude that the inner sect elder was willing to take him in," Su Zime said with a faint smile. "If his aptitude is destroyed, he will no longer be worth investing in." "Do you think that inner sect elder would make a big fuss over a cripple, causing a great disturbance?" Xiao Gizi nodded in perplexity, feeling that there was some logic to what Su Zime said. "Go ahead and do it. They'll take responsibility if anything happens." Su Zime waved his hand and replied. The Heavenly Sword sect was located to the west of Beacon Fire City, with the entire mountain peak standing upright between heaven and earth like a sharp sword, although the strongest among the Heavenly Sword sect were only at the Esteem Vein realm, considered a mere third-rate power for many youngsters without any background. This place was still their holy land for cultivation. In the mornings at the Heavenly Sword sect, the early sun shone down from the sky, awakening all beings. The light heralded the arrival of a new day. At the central location of the Heavenly Sword sect, there is a peculiar place called Heavenly Sword Peak. The name of the Heavenly Sword sect came from this peculiar place. It is said that the sect's first-generation founder, Heavenly Sword Elder, once fought with a strong opponent of equal esteem vein realm level here for 3 days and nights. In the end, his sword intent tore through the firmament and, with one strike, he killed his opponent, but the sword intent did not stop after slaying the enemy. It split a nearby mountain peak in half, and sword intent wrapped around the mountain for tens of meters. From then on, the mountain gained a new name, Heavenly Sword Peak. As for the elder who wielded that sword intent, his name itself was a mystery, and people have grown accustomed to calling him the Heavenly Sword Elder. Inside the Heavenly Sword Peak lies the sword intent remnants left by the Heavenly Sword Elder after that battle, so all the disciples of the Heavenly Sword sect often come here to comprehend the sword intent, hoping one day to understand their own sword intent. Chapter 77. Below Heavenly Sword Peak, the ground was littered with scars and the intangible sword intent wrapped around the mountain. The mad wind howled, sword chi soared into the clouds. The peak, hundreds of meters tall, had been cleaved in half, and between the two halves, one could vaguely see sword intent bursting forth. Disciples who came to visit later could imagine the intensity of that battle. Sitting in meditation only 3 meters from Heavenly Sword Peak, Chu Yang circulated the cultivation techniques of step battle. Immortal Ju, slowly harnessing the surrounding sword intent to temper himself. Grasping the sword intent was difficult, and Chu Yang knew this well. However, through his recent enlightenment, He had vaguely touched upon some threshold. Around Chu Yang, many other disciples also sat in meditation, either contemplating the sword intent or using it to refine themselves. Do you see that? That's Brother Chu Yang. Some disciples huddled together, pointing at Chu Yang's silhouette and whispering among themselves, "One day, I want to be someone like Brother Chu Yang." Enough of that, he just got lucky and was taken as a personal disciple by the sect master. What's so great about that? Another disciple said, unable to hide his envy. Don't be sour. He managed to defeat someone from the true vein realm while being in the condensing vein realm. You're still far from that level. The Heavenly Sword sect had been bustling with activity lately since the sect had recruited a batch of new disciples this year. With fresh blood pouring in, the sect naturally brimmed with vitality, and this young man named Chu Yang could be said to be the most talked about person in Heavenly Sword sect during this time. He passed the test in Beacon Fire City and then came to the Heavenly Sword sect. As a newcomer without any background, being suppressed by some of the older disciples upon arrival was common, but this youngster named Chu Yang didn't choose to submit, unlike other new disciples who would swallow their pride and give their cultivation resources granted by the sect to the older disciples. He chose to staunchly resist to the end, just as everyone thought Chu Yang would succumb under the suppression of these older disciples, ultimately fall, and be forced to exit in disgrace. After all, there had been other hard-headed newcomers who had faced similar situations, but probably no one expected this young man to rise meteorically, shining bright like a comet or a brilliant firework. When he joined the Heavenly Sword sect, he was already at the level of condensing vein realm. Such cultivation in the outer gate, with only spirit vein realm standards, was indeed extraordinary. After he won the outer gate's grand competition, it was only natural for him to enter the inner gate. Many thought that after entering the inner gate, he would be disciplined, with the older disciples tempering the rookie's edge. Instead, he became unbeatable within the inner gate, invincible among his peers. Can you believe it? His fellow condensing vein realm inner gate disciples stood no chance against him. Even those who were 1 or 2 minor levels above him couldn't hold out for long. Later on, due to his rising fame, he angered a core disciple, and you must know, core disciples all possess true vein realm cultivation. The core disciple challenged Chu Yang, and the two fought on the sect gate's combat stage in front of thousands of disciples. At the peak of the condensing vein realm, he defeated the core disciple, who was in the true vein realm. This competition caused an uproar within the sect. It swept through the entire sect like a storm overnight, and the youth had truly made a name for himself. In the end, even Ubuli, the sect master of the Heavenly Sword sect, was alerted and declared that he would take him as his closed-door disciple. The youth's rise to fame also made him the object of worship in the hearts of many disciples. Everyone was a new disciple with no background. If you can succeed, why can't I? There were many disciples with this mindset, as everyone had risen from the bottom and could empathize. Therefore, Chu Yang's reputation was even greater among the lower-level disciples. Of course, these disciples probably would never guess that the person they admired was someone who had a grandpa as a cheat. "Brother, the sect master is looking for you." At this moment, a disciple came to Chu Yang's side and woke up the still meditating youth. Understood. Chu Yang nodded. After a long time without seeing him, the youth had grown much taller, and his once immature face had gradually become firm and mature. The wandering dragon sword hung on his back, and he wore a plain white robe. His long hair was somewhat messy on top of his head due to not having been cut for a while. "I've reached the peak of the condensing vein realm. It won't be long before I can advance to the true vein realm." Chu Yang stood up, thinking to himself. Before leaving, Chu Yang took a deep look at the broken peak of Heavenly Sword Peak. Lately, the sword intent in his heart had become clearer, as if he was only one step away from breaking through that barrier and comprehending the sword intent. Chu Yang made his way to the mountain where Ubuli resided. In the courtyard, Ubuli, in a green robe, sat in a pavilion drinking tea. "Master, you wanted to see me?" Chu Yang approached and asked. "When you took me as your master, I didn't really have anything to give you." Ubuli nodded, then took out a book and handed it to Chu Yang, saying, "Take it, it might be of some use to you." Chu Yang received the book, which appeared to be a handwritten copy of a cultivation technique. The pages were very new, with 4 bold characters written on the plain white cover: Heavenly Gangsword Cannon. Seeing Chu Yang's puzzled expression, Ubuli explained with a smile, "This sword cannon is left by the founder of our Heavenly Sword sect. If you can comprehend it, you will be able to understand the Heavenly Gangsword intent." "Thank you, Master." Chu Yang quickly took the sword cannon and respectfully replied, "To tell you the truth, in my lifetime I've seen many disciples with brilliant talents and extraordinary aptitudes. But what attracts me most about you is that heart of way of inquiry," Yu Bewley said with emotion, "a heart that is brave and never cowardly or hesitant." "I will do my best," Chu Yang responded solemnly. "I'm old now, and if nothing unexpected happens in this life, it's very hard for me to advance further. In the end, this era belongs to you young people." Yu Bewley finished the tea in front of him and shook his head with a smile. "You know, our Heavenly Sword sect is not very well known in the extreme west region. Many disciples who want to join a sect first consider the true martial holy sect, the Divine Sun holy sect, and other immortal gates. Like those, and if not them, there are still some first-rate and second-rate sects. The disciples who end up in our third-rate Heavenly Sword sect are often those who have been eliminated, with aptitudes that are poor to a certain degree." Chu Yang nodded and did not interrupt Yu Bewley's words. After all, large sects not only provide their disciples with a bigger world, but their strength also offers better protection. Your talent, even in those immortal gates of imperial rule, would certainly not sink into obscurity, Yu Bewley said with a smile. "Actually, when I took you as my disciple, wasn't it also somewhat for my own self-interest? I wanted to tie you to the fate of our sect, hoping you won't blame me in your heart." Chapter 78. Yu Bewley spoke openly and sincerely. People often say that true feelings can never be retained since ancient times, and only through schemes can one capture hearts, but in reality, when schemes are overused, you'll find that true feelings are the most precious. Sometimes, what seems like true feelings is just a counter-scheme to the all-too-familiar schemes. "Master, rest assured, no matter how great my achievements are in the future, I will never forget that I am a disciple of the Heavenly Sword sect," Chu Yang solemnly responded. "Good, go ahead. If the sect gate ever encounters any trouble, you can come directly to me," Yu Bewley said with a smile. After leaving the peak, Chu Yang returned to his own courtyard. He first took out the Heavenly Gang Sword Manual to study and looked at the ring, asking, "Teacher, what do you think of the sword manual?" "It's passable, but it's suitable for your current stage of cultivation," Ink Elder's voice sounded. "You can start cultivating the sword manual as a foundation. I give you advanced sword intent vein skills now, you wouldn't understand them." Chu Yang nodded. The path of cultivation was profound and intricate. In fact, he couldn't comprehend many parts of the step battle immortal Jew he was currently cultivating and still required Ink Elder's explanations. The ancestral shrine of the Ren family was located in a valley that had become barren, and ever since the sun-devouring emperor ascended several eras ago, the Ren family had completely declined. Decline was a terrifying thing for the descendants of a great emperor. The world always believed you held the legacy of the great emperor, and when you lacked the ability to possess that legacy, some things would no longer bring glory but disaster instead. Just like the descendants of Emperor Feiyu, the Ji family, the Ren family also feared such events and had moved to this barren valley long ago, wishing to seclude themselves here. Regrettably, fate would not have it so at this moment. After the surrounding area of the Ren family's ancestral shrine had been quiet for many years, suddenly a dark light burst forth from within the shrine, piercing the sky. Then came the collapse of space, the disarray of spiritual energy, and the space around the shrine fell into a regular distortion. Mad wind raged around, and many trees were uprooted. The space seemed like a spider's web, beginning to show dense cracks everywhere. A deep, boundless black hole suddenly appeared above the shrine. The moment this black hole appeared, all the spiritual energy seemed to whip up a storm, wreaking havoc around the black hole. A force of devouring spread throughout the area, and a man slowly walked out from the black hole. He was dressed in a black robe with short hair sticking up, black spiritual energy flowing around him. He walked on air with a placid face, and a faint black glint flickered in his eyes as the power of devouring emanated from him. Ren Pingxing surveyed his surroundings. Releasing the aura of the esteem vein realm from his body, his gaze looked far into the distance, towards the direction of the Heavenly Sword sect. "Yu Bewley, it's time to settle our accounts," he said. The morning light bathed in the spring breeze. The light of the early sun, always so gentle. With the arrival of autumn, the green leaves on the trees slowly turned yellow and then withered, leaving the big tree behind as they were carried away by the breeze. Yu Bewley stood on the edge of the mountainside, looking over the several hundred kilometers that belonged to the sect gate's territory. The mountain ranges stretched sinuously, still shrouded in the mist that had not yet been dispersed from the night before, as disciples had already begun their early morning cultivation. Some were practicing against each other, some were sitting in meditation to absorb spiritual energy, and others were heading to Heavenly Sword Peak to comprehend sword intent. Eubuli had a smile on his lips as he returned to the courtyard. Master, the sect gate you left me, I have finally not let it down. Although the sect gate was small, it was thriving and seemed to emit hope for all to see. Eubuli knew that Heavenly Sword Sect was still far from a second-rate sect, primarily because it lacked powerful masters to preside over it. Without sufficient high-end combat power, this was as good as it could get. He sat in the pavilion, poured himself a cup of tea, and suddenly felt something in his heart. His gaze shifted to the distant sky. A mass of dark fog raced from afar at great speed. Stirring. The spiritual energy around it, the space where the fog passed, began to collapse. Atop that dark fog, the thick murderous aura was almost solidifying. In just a few moments, the dark fog had already arrived in front of Eubuli. Ran Pingxing stood in the sky, looking down at Eubuli, grinding his teeth as he said, "Eubuli, it's been a long time." Eubuli looked up at Rin Pingxing and felt as if he were in a stunned dream. The momentum in the dark fog was surging, and the pressure of the Esteem Vein realm overshadowed the mountain he was on. Especially the almost imperceptible devouring force from the other person was something he dreaded. "Brother Pingxing, long time no see." Eubuli smiled and emptied the cup of tea in his hand, saying with a sigh, "I still miss you calling me Brother Bewley. You still have the face to say that. You betrayed our trust, all just for an imaginary great emperor's legacy, slaughtering my entire Ren family." Ren Pingxing's face was contorted with veins popping as the dark fog around him thickened. "I always regarded you as a good brother, yet you were using me all along for the great emperor's legacy. Everyone comes into this world with their own mission." Eubuli did not answer, but rather said calmly, "Brother Pingxing, what is your mission?" "Mission?" Ren Pingxing was taken aback, his eyes fixed on Eubuli. "I grew up in Heavenly Sword Sect. Back then, I vowed to make it one of the strongest sects in the extreme west region." Eubuli said with a light smile, "I want to lead this sect to glorious brilliance. That's my dream, and that is my mission." "Your so-called mission is to build your dreams on the pain of others," Ren Pingxing said with a sorrowful expression, shaking his head. "Brother Pingxing, you are mistaken. Everything I have done is merely the basic principle by which all things in this world live. The law of the jungle, survival of the fittest, the strong are stronger and the weak perish." Eubuli knew he was at fault and was not inclined to argue too much. Indeed, they were good brothers, or at least they had been. They had ridden together, and over a jug of wine, they had traveled through half of the extreme west region. They had known each other for more than a decade and had sworn brotherhood. But what Ren Pingxing did not know was that everything since their meeting was a trap that he had orchestrated. Life is like a play, and a play mirrors life. His original goal had always been the great emperor's legacy. Unfortunately, even after knowing each other for more than a decade and searching the entire Ren family, he had not found the legacy land of the sun-devouring emperor. He could not wait any longer, as he was getting older, and without the great emperor's legacy, it would be hard for him to advance further, so he massacred the entire Ren family, hoping to intimidate Ren Pingxing into surrendering the sun-devouring emperor's legacy. "Well then, since you speak of survival of the fittest?" Ren Pingxing laughed loudly, his black hair moving without wind, and the dark fog enveloped half the sky. Even the sun seemed to be devoured, the light dimmed, and darkness descended. He looked at Eubuli with a manic smile. "Today, I'm not just going to kill you. I'll also destroy this sect right before your eyes, so that your so-called brilliance and glory will be buried with you, straight to hell." Chapter 79. Ren Pingxing's body emitted rising black mist, and a pitch-black flame ignited from nowhere. The moment the flame erupted, the surrounding space, including the air, was completely annihilated, creating a brief vacuum around Ren Pingxing, with flames spreading over his entire body. Ren Pingxing was like a falling meteor, charging towards Eubuli with an indomitable momentum. As the flames descended from the sky, it seemed as though Eubuli's eyes reflected the firelight. He slowly drew his heavy sword, the blade over a foot wide and carrying an aura of ancient heaviness. The entire brown heavy sword, when grasped in his hand, instantly altered Eubuli's previously calm aura. A sharp sword, intense sword to the skies, as if splitting the space above in half, threatening to rend the firmament. Eubuli, eyes blazing, swung his heavy sword at the pitch-black flames rushing toward him with one strike. Countless spaces began to shatter, and the rumbling sound was incessant, as the air compressed and condensed before explosively bursting. When the heavy sword collided with the fireball, a scorching wave emanated between them. The surrounding peaks were obliterated by the wave, with courtyards, pavilions, rockeries, and weeping willows flattened, reducing Eubuli's residence to ruins. The mountain began to crumble, fissures spreading from the foothold towards the mid-slope, the rumbling explosions echoing throughout the entire Heavenly Sword sect. Heavens, that's the mountain where the sect master resides. This anomaly immediately caught the attention of all the disciples in the Heavenly Sword sect. Has someone come to attack our Heavenly Sword sect? Who is the sect master fighting with to cause such a commotion? Setting aside the buzzing discussion of the Heavenly Sword sect disciples for the moment, Eubuli watched the face approaching him, with black-flamed hands striking his sword's blade. The intense impact caused his arms to tremble involuntarily, and the ground beneath his feet cracked even more. The fiery heat, as if to incinerate everything, struck Eubuli's face, forcing him to swiftly retract his heavy sword and leap backwards several steps into the air. He too walked on air, holding the heavy sword with both hands, facing Renpingxing from a distance. Have you received the inheritance of the sun-devouring emperor? Eubuli asked with a grave expression. It wasn't just that the other party's realm had reached the esteem vein realm. Even the original flames he used seemed to have evolved a level. The entire person seemed completely transformed. A change so rapid that Eubuli could think of no other explanation. Enough talk. Today I shall destroy your Heavenly Sword sect. Renpingxing snorted coldly, exuding an imposing aura, and once again threw a punch with a rumbling sound. Eubuli took a deep breath, holding the sword with both hands, raising it high above his head. The sword intent on the blade was still somewhat nebulous until Eubuli closed his eyes slowly, and when he opened them once more, the lingering sword intent on the heavy sword seemed to have undergone a drastic transformation. His eyes flickered with sword intent, and a fierce and resilient white sword intent began to rise slowly from his body. That was the Heavenly Gang sword intent, left behind by the opening mountain ancestor of the Heavenly Sword sect, the Heavenly Sword Elder. Compared to regular sword intent, Heavenly Gang sword intent was even more powerful in attack. The sword intent pierced the clouds, dispelling much of the dark mist above. As Eubuli stood amidst the white sword intent, his garments snapping loudly in the fierce winds, when the sword fell, space was torn apart, leaving a white fissure, the surrounding sword intent lingering for a long time. Renpingxing frowned as the two collided, distinctly feeling that sharp and resilient sensation. The sword intent was not simply stronger in force, but its defense had also greatly strengthened. Under one stroke of the sword, the black flames pervading his fists were actually suppressed, and faint sword marks appeared on the back of his hand. Renpingxing retreated to one side, his gaze fixed as he observed Eubuli, who was becoming stronger as the battle raged on, his aura surging around him. Leave the inheritance of the sun-devouring emperor, and I will let you go, Eubuli said calmly, holding his heavy sword. Renpingxing sneered disdainfully and whispered to himself, sun-devouring demon fist. In an instant, the devouring power that was faintly discernible around him began to spread, becoming stronger and stronger, and behind him, a black hole appeared. The spiritual energy in the surrounding space grew turbulent and was completely absorbed by the black hole. As the black hole became saturated with absorption, it began to condense bit by bit and then shrank to the size of a fist around the black hole. A small part of the space had completely collapsed with spatial currents rampaging and howling by its side. The fist-sized black hole was actually attached to Renpingxing's right arm and fist. Renpingxing clenched his right fist and smashed it directly towards Eubuli. He was like an arrow released from the bow, extremely fast, turning the space that his fist passed through into shattered fragments like glass. Eubuli slashed with his sword to defend, but as soon as the heavy sword made contact with the fist, his expression changed drastically. The fist seemed to carry an inherent devouring power, and the Heavenly Gang sword intent on his heavy sword was devoured in an instant. Crack! He faintly heard the sound of shattering. The cracking sound came repeatedly, and Eubuli saw cracks forming on his heavy sword. Moreover, the cracks were widening, spreading bit by bit, and he was shocked. he knew his heavy sword was made of heavenly tier materials. With a boom of shattering, the heavy sword seemed to reach its limit and finally broke into pieces. Under Renpingsheng's power, Renpingsheng did not stop there. After shattering the heavy sword, his fist, still carrying immense force, heavily struck Yu Buli's abdomen. Yu Buli could feel the pain deep in his bones, his entire chest nearly caving in. Blood scattered in the air, his body heavily flung backward through the space, his clothes already torn, and the long hair that was tied behind his head became completely undone. At this moment, Yu Buli thought of many things. Could it be that I was really wrong? Because of my decision, I have brought a catastrophe upon the Heavenly Sword sect. Many say that when humans are on the brink of death, their consciousness will go through a period of time travel, and their life experiences flash before their eyes like a movie. Yu Buli didn't know if he was close to death, but his consciousness, in a state of confusion, seemed to be revisiting everything from the past. He remembered clearly. He was born in a very ordinary small village. He didn't have extraordinary talents, but he had always dreamed of being a hero since childhood. He wanted to become the hero from the legends, hoping that one day his life would also be celebrated and known by all. At the age of 15. He said goodbye to his parents, wishing to join a grand sect gate to commence his hero's dream. Chapter 80. However, reality was ultimately cruel. He went to the Imperial Rule Immortal sect and many other first-rate and second-rate sect gates, but in the end, he failed due to various shortcomings. Yu Buli remembered clearly. It was a rainy night. He curled up next to a large tree, crying, "The path of a martial artist is destined to be fraught with difficulties." The elder's voice rang in his ears. He lifted his head slightly, and that night, the elder told him a lot. Before leaving, the elder smiled and asked him, "Do you want to cultivate?" His heart seemed to skip a beat. He nodded excitedly and incredulously. The elder took him into the sect and accepted him as a direct disciple later. He found out that the sect was called the Heavenly Sword Sect, and his master was the second sect master of the sect, White Cloud Sword Master. His master was wholeheartedly devoted to making the Heavenly Sword Sect prosper, and at that time, his young heart also silently swore to spread the name of the Heavenly Sword Sect across the entire extreme West region, to show those sects that once rejected him what he was capable of. The thoughts of a child are naive. Perhaps they were tinged with the stubbornness and indignation of youth. But what is precious is that over the years, he never changed his original intention, but his aptitude was ultimately limited, and the sect's resources were also hard-pressed to cultivate very powerful martial artists. Perhaps effort really is just the most humble means to success. He could only set his sights on the great emperor's inheritance. If he could obtain a part of the great emperor's inheritance, then, as long as he had time, he was confident that even if he could not compare with the Imperial Rule Immortal sect, he could compete with the first-rate sects. He slaughtered the Ren family, hunted Renpingsheng, and it wasn't just Renpingsheng who was saddened. His own heart also suffered. A man is not a plant. How can he be heartless? Even the most accomplished plants are capable of emotions. He had known Renpingsheng for over a decade. He was not heartless. It was just that between his brother and his sect, he chose the sect. No one would understand his pain and turmoil because he was the one who raised the butcher's knife. It was all his own doing. Yu Buli's eyes were somewhat blurry, and if he were to die just like this, it might also be a form of relief. It seemed he was too tired of living. The howling wind passed by his ears, and when he thought he was going to be smashed to pieces, his body suddenly lightened, as if someone had caught him mid-air. He lay in a warm embrace. Yu Buli raised his head and saw that it was an elder who had caught him. He looked at the elder, and the elder looked back at him. The atmosphere seemed somewhat ambiguous. "Great elder, you?" Yu Buli was about to say something, but saw the great elder shake his head and reply, "Don't talk. Kiss me." Cough, cough. The above line was just the author being cheeky. "Don't speak. You're gravely injured. We've already requested the ancestral coffin. You should recover well," said the great elder. Hearing the great elder's words, Yu Buli nodded and then began to operate his cultivation technique to slowly restore his body that was in complete disarray. At the side of Heavenly Sword Peak, several elders of the sect gate could be seen carrying two coffins rushing over. One of the coffins was black, and the other was white. The black coffin had the pattern of a sword carved on it, while the white coffin was adorned with drifting clouds. "Do you really have to be sworn enemies with our heavenly sword sect today?" The great elder looked up at Ren Pingshang in the sky and solemnly asked, "When he slaughtered the Ren family back then, did he ever consider an undying enmity?" Ren Pingshang's face twisted as he questioned in return. The demonic chi grew even stronger around him, almost covering half of the sky with black fog. He stood aloof as if a demon king indifferent to the heavens, looking down upon the entire heavenly sword sect from his superior position. "Open the ancestral coffins." The great elder also knew there was no room for easing the situation anymore, naturally not wanting to let a threat like Ren Pingshang remain. If they did not slay Ren Pingshang today, he might seek revenge on the heavenly sword sect in the future, to the extent that the disciples of the sect would not dare to take half a step out of the sect gate. The elders used special methods to awaken the ancestral coffins, prompting all disciples of the heavenly sword sect to kneel down and worship. "The ancestors founded our sect here in ancient times, slaying formidable enemies and striking awe into the heavens. Now, I am incompetent and have disturbed the ancestral masters' slumber, hoping for his aid to help us overcome this crisis." The great elder stood in front of the ancestral coffins, his expression one of sorrowful appeal. He knew that every emergence of the ancestral master from the coffin not only cost a great deal of dust bloodstones but also consumed several years of lifespan. For someone whose life was nearing an end, every second, let alone years, was precious. Following the great elder's words, the white ancestral coffin beside him began to tremble. Cloud upon cloud of white blossomed around the coffin. Cloud after cloud, so much worry. "How many years has it been?" An aged voice came from inside the coffin. "Ancestral master, 200 years have passed since you entered your slumber." The great elder quickly replied, watching the lid of the ancestral coffin gradually opening. Yubuli began to tremble slightly. He still remembered that rainy day when the elder had brought him into the heavenly sword sect, every memory etched deep into his heart. Cloud after cloud extended across the land. And, when those clouds dispersed before their eyes, everyone's heart skipped a beat. The years were like a passing cloud, and it seemed like all the past memories were just like fleeting clouds. The malice in everyone's hearts was gradually soothed, and the world entered a state of serenity. Could this be? An old disciple watching the great battle from afar, upon witnessing such a miraculous sight, was too astonished to speak. The one known as the White Cloud Sword Master, the White Cloud Ancestral Master, was the former sect master of our heavenly sword sect. A disciple spoke with a trembling voice. For many disciples, such a figure only existed in the historical records of the sect. However, as the real person emerged, many were overwhelmed with excitement. The lid of the coffin was fully opened, revealing an old man in a white robe, his hair completely grayed. Stepping out, the old man possessed no imposing aura. He appeared very calm, and his smile gave off a benevolent feeling. He held a horsetail whisk in his hand, like a lofty hermit of the highlands, and though he had slept for hundreds of years, his robe remained spotless. "If the White Cloud Ancestral Master is in this white coffin, then what about the black coffin beside it?" a disciple asked, puzzled. Could it be? Some disciples seemed to realize something, their eyes widening with disbelief on their faces. "Heavenly Sword Elder." Someone said the name with a trembling voice. The disciples couldn't help but be shocked, for the influence of the Heavenly Sword Elder on the Heavenly Sword sect was too profound. Whether it was his personally founding the sect or the legend related to the Heavenly Sword Peak, where the ancestral master had split Nameless Peak with a single strike, it was deeply ingrained in their hearts. The gentle breeze stirred a few willow trees, and beneath the fluttering leaves, with all eyes focused, the black coffin also began to tremble.